Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out another situation about Poe. I'm kind of stuck in the middle of a chapter. I will just begin. Readers do exist, however, he insisted, and always will exist, who to hearts of maddening fervor unite in perfection the sentiment of the beautiful, that divine sixth sense, which is yet so faintly understood, that sense which phrenology has attempted to embody in its origin of ideality, that sense which is the basis of all cousins' dreams, that sense which speaks of God through his purest, if not his sole attribute, which proves that which alone proves his existence. To readers such as these, and only to such as these, must be left the decision of what is true poesy is, and these, with no hesitation, will decide that the origin of poetry lies in the thirst for a wilder beauty than earth supplies, that poetry itself is the imperfect effort to quench its immortal thirst by novel combinations of beautiful forms. An elite such as Poe describes here must be very beautiful and very idiosyncratic. It shrinks to size so largely with his final words that it is questionable whether anyone but himself could be included in it. And the particular intensity of the passage suggests that he was justifying himself here to face in the failure of literary America to give his poetry and his literary ideals any real measure of recognition. While in some moods he responded to lack of support by diminishing his elite, imaginary elites, in other moods, Poe was opening the door to the only real audience to which he had any access. Thus, we find him tentatively suggesting that the voice of the people does not always represent a corrupted taste, or claiming parenthetically that the popular feelings which approves these qualities is unfailingly poetic. From his earliest criticisms, he has assumed a self-defense and an elitist conspiratorial theory, which attributed popularity to the exploitation of the vulgar and by writers and reviewers, but Poe gradually adapted this conspiratorial theory to defend not only the good and unpopular writer, but also the mass audience, which might have a saner taste than the press led one to imagine. Perhaps he suggested that public opinion had not been fairly ascertained. Perhaps it was only so far as the popular mind was reflected in imperial journalism that could be said to be corrupt. When the popular voice goes with the popular heart, he claimed, the popular voice is right. And he began from time to time to invoke the opinion of the mass audience to ratify his own judgment, attacking Griswold's Prose and Poetry of America in reference to the tide of public disappropriation, which has set in a strongly upon its author, and claiming that puffery by the poet's friends and inoculated 19ths of the community with the opinion that William Lord's poems were contemptible. The first extant statement of this developing movement of thought is the 1840 review of Barnaby Rudge, in which Poe reversed his earlier views that Dickens, being a great writer, could not be completely popular, while agreeing that popularity in itself is no measure of worth. He saw Barnaby Rudge here as an illustration of the fact that a book can suit at the same time the critical and the popular taste, and claimed that in fact the popularity of the book was a legitimate and inevitable result of certain and well understood critical propositions reduced by genius into practice. Criticism was simply the theory governing practical writing, and the theory is only good as such in proportion to its reducibility to practice. A similar critical acumen on the part of Defoe and Goldsmith had previously resulted in the popularity of Robinson Crusoe and The Vicar of Wakefield. This review appeared in Graham's immediately following Poe's only really successful series of articles for the mass circulation magazine, and it may be conjectured that Poe's moods of confidence in the power of the skillful writer over the mass audience sprang from his own current success. In the previous issues of Graham's, to that in which he reviewed Barnaby Rudge, Poe had wound up the popular autography series, claiming that its popularity assures us the differences which exist among us are differences not of real but of affected opinion, and that the voice of him who maintains fearlessly that he believes honestly is pretty sure to find an echo, if the speaker is not be mad, in the vast heart of the world at large. This momentary faith in his chances of the mass audience seems to have faded by the March issue of Graham's, where Poe returns to the alternate stance of extreme and solitary elitism and laboriously modified the implications of the Barnaby Rudge review accordingly. Against any contemporary, the popularity implied excellence, and argued that in the fact popularity is prima facie evidence of the book's demerit, inasmuch as it shows a stooping to conquer, inasmuch as it shows that the author has dealt largely, if not altogether, in matters which are susceptible to appearance or appreciation by the mass of mankind, and uneducated thought by uncultivated taste, by unrefined and unguided passion. He denied that there could be any literary value in the particulars of the work which are popular, allowing, however, that a half or two-thirds of the matter of the book might be susceptible of popular appreciation, and the remaining portion the delight of the highest intellect and genius and absolute caviar to the rabble. The writer who looked to his own interest would combine all votes in this way, and Poe conceded that the skill with which the lower taste of the populace, while addressed, might be admired and commanded by the critic, was nevertheless a grievous wrong to his own genius for Dickens or any writer to appeal to the popular judgment at all. Indeed, that any true spirit could be respond to the incense of the mere popular applause was a thing inconceivable, inappreciable, a paradox which gives the lie unto itself, a mystery more profound than the well of Demetrius, and usual Poe's purported self-justification in the face of non-recognition betrays itself in the rather wild rhetoric, and it is in a similar mood that Poe, in his next statement of this theme, reduced the elite to himself, dismissing the whole question of audience with his very influential version of Art for Art's Sake. R.H. Horn explained that the introductory note in his epic poem in 3 books, Orion, and that he composed it as a novel experiment upon the mind of the nation, echoing Scott's description of the epic-making Waverley as an experiment in public taste. Poe opposed any consideration of the audience by the writer, claiming that if Horn had listened to the dictates of his own soul, he could not have failed to see that there was no nobler literary enterprise than the poem, written solely for the poem's sake, with its characteristic of Poe that he dragooned Horn's inner soul to his own support, finding no outer sign of sympathy for his own current view in Horn's statement. I said earlier that Poe had developed a conspiratorial theory in explaining the failure of genius to receive its due appreciation, and that he extended his theory to blame unscrupulous journalists rather than the mass audience itself for his failure. Poe's next approach of the question of audience is the most characteristic presentation of his conspiratorial theory. It is particularly interesting because its descriptive form gives full expression to Poe's divided soul and its conflicting impulses. His first identities himself with the accepted author within a literary community, an author accustomed to seclusion who becomes accepted within the literary elite, meets, so Poe tells us, unanimous agreement with all his original judgments about the literature of his time. Why then, asked Poe, does he meet such a very different opinion of the merits of the same authors in the literary press? To explain this anomaly, Poe identifies himself with the journalistic saying, "We put on paper with a grave air that we could not for our lives assert personally to a friend without either blushing or laughing outright, and in the opinion of the press is not an honest opinion, that necessarily it is impossible that he should be an honest opinion is never denied by the members of the press themselves. Poe then defends the press for the praise of bad books, blaming this entirely on the effrontery and persistence of unscrupulous quacks who wear down the hardworking journalists, so that he accepts and prints glowing reviews of their work. Poe finally depicts the men of the genius who are generally too indolent and careless about worldly concerns, too much governed by their pride of intellect to seek publicity in such unworthy ways, so that their works are utterly overwhelmed and indistinguished in the flood of the apparent public adulation of toadies and quacks. Thus, as in the same time as he secures and defends his status as an unappreciated genius, Poe exonerates himself as journalist from any blame which might be thought to result from the dealing with the mass audience. The passage which he rewrote and used as an introduction to the Godet's Literate series represents the nearest that Poe got to the synthesis of his two literary selves, conspiring journalist and unappreciated genius. Poe's last record attitude of the audience in the 1847 Hawthorne Review represented a period from June to December 1846, to which he was an exultant about the effect that the facts of the case of M. Valdemar have been having in both America and Europe. They may help to explain the review's explicit comment on the mass audience. It affirms triumphantly that the conspiratorial position taken in the Barnaby Rudge reviews and subsequently suppressed. He sharply contradicts the usual idea that the original writers are not likely to become popular, claiming it is, in fact, the excitable, undisciplined, and childlike popular mind which most keenly feels the original. The stress on the childlike popular mind is significant, since Poe always took an immense delight in the way people were taken in by the hoaxes. Elizabeth Barrett, in a letter which Poe quoted in several of his own letters at the time and apparently used to read to visitors, spoke of the effect of M. Valdemar as one of the dreadful doubts as to whether it can be true, as to the children say of ghostwriters. Hawthorne, Poe's argument goes on, was not popular because he was not really original. Hawthorne had, of course, not been condemned by his unpopularity, but by the few who belong properly to books and to whom books perhaps do not quite properly belong, that is, by the literary elite. But this is only because of the few mistakenly valued Hawthorne according to his potential rather than his actual performance, while their taste had been warped by the long pondering upon books as books merely. The simple truth is, says Poe aggressively, that the writer who aims at impressing the people is always wrong when he fails in forcing that people to receive the impression. Here we see Poe disassociating himself explicitly from any literary elite and accepting instead the kind of conspiratorial attitude to the mass audience of which the gentlemanly tradition had always disapproved. That leaves us for the next chapter, which is developing anti-elitism and American nationality. This is the beginning stories of elitism, literary analysis and writing in the form of prose and poetry from early America, from England to early America. This is the history of our literary language from England to America. So if you like it at all and enjoy what I'm saying, please like and subscribe. And it's very important to grow this channel because I'm speaking the truth here. And God bless the children of the world.